This is Let's Talk Football here on the sportshacks.com, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jerry Strain. Jerry is a former sporting director, is the term I'm going to use, but I'm going to ask him to introduce himself in a second, at Hamilton Football Club in Scotland, a man with very strong Irish roots, a man with very strong Celtic roots. And Jerry is with us today because a few weeks ago on Substack, and we will share the link for this, the headline tells a story in itself, and I'm going to ask Jerry about that in a second. Scotland's three tribes and the lie we still tell ourselves. How Scottish football still wrestles with identity, Irishness, selective outrage, soft power, and the ghost Scotland insists it buried long ago. Jerry, that's quite a story, and we will come to that in a second. But you're very welcome, first of all, to the Sports Hacks.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate you having me on. It's kind of you.
Just give us a bit of your own background, because I know you're strongly linked with Ireland, and you have some relations to some of our football fans, maybe those of a slightly older generation, will remember very fondly.
Yeah, well, my family are Irish. As a large portion of Scots and expats are. We're Irish diaspora, and I'm kind of proud of my roots and proud of my heritage, because that's how I was brought up. You're brought up with values, and to always be appreciative of where you've come from and who went before you. So my commitment, I guess, to my roots is, the good old saying about the soup takers. I'm proud of the fact that my family weren't. But through adult eyes in 2026, that commitment is maybe a bit of a burden. When you dig deep, perhaps deeper than you should, in a country that's still got challenges.
We'll come back to that in a second, but in terms of your family from Dublin, particularly in Navan Road, Castleknock, I know you have relations living in Trim in County Meath. But John Kelly is a football man who many of us will know, and many of us have been friends with over the years and have met through mutual friends, etc. Tell us about John.
Oh, John's an incredible one. He's a good bit older now. I think legend has it that he saved a penalty from Stanley Matthews. That's my understanding. And he was presented with his Ireland caps maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, that he didn't get when he played internationally. There was a period of time that the caps weren't given out by the FAI, and thankfully they righted that, and John got his caps a number of years ago. So he's still on Navan Road. A tremendous man, very holy man.
And John is your uncle?
Yeah, I'm Uncle John Kelly. Yeah. He's a tremendous man. All for the kids playing football. He's certainly helped a lot of the kids in and around that area. Some of them went on to good careers, and others' careers came to an end, but he was completely devoted to youth football and a pathway for kids through the Irish system. So a tremendous man.
In terms of your own then involvement in football, I mean, is it inevitable, if you're born in Glasgow with an Irish background, is it inevitable that Celtic is your team? Is that just born and bred with you?
I think so. There's perhaps a bit of bias in that, because that's what I am. But I'd written about this. It's bizarre. Celtic find you. You don't find them. So whether it's the Brother Wilfred story, whether it's the Donegal Shamrock in the middle of the turf, whether it's the green and the white, whether it's the tricolour that flies above the North Stand, there's just so many inextricable links with your heritage and your faith and what you're all about. Now, what was really interesting for me growing up was Celtic was about football. It was never about religion. So I didn't understand the tribalism to the extent that some people go on about it. So the greatest ever Celtic players and managers have been non-Catholic, been Protestant. Ken Dalglish and Jock Stein for two. So I was never brought up in a way that you discriminated against anyone because of what they were or what they represented or what their background was. I was brought up in a way that we were all the same. And I guess it's when you venture into adult life, or even maybe early stages of adolescence, you start asking questions. What's a Fenian? What's a Tarrier? What's a bead rattler? And your mum doesn't want to answer it. So your grandmother steps in and she gives you an education based on the prejudice that she was incumbent on her in the early days of settling in Scotland. And that gives you a different dynamic, almost like a chip in your shoulder. That you're dying to shake it off, but certain things happen through time that actually you become aware that it's never going anywhere. Do you know, you are a minority. Scotland's population's 5.6 million, I think it is. And the reality is that anyone of a Catholic background is a minority.
And that's still very much the case, you feel, within Scottish football. And I know you related in the piece to a story that when you got involved in football as an adult, now this is in your working environment, a very prominent official in the Scottish FA said something to you that resonated with you and resonates to this day.
Yeah, so there's a wee bit of background prior to that. When I first get involved at Hamilton, someone who was formerly involved at the club had said, now for context, the guy who bought the club was a Turkish Muslim. So, and I didn't know, I never knew what his background was. I knew he was Turkish, but I couldn't tell you if he was Christian, Muslim, whatever. But anyway, we're only in, he appointed me as director of football, and within a few weeks, the comment that was made was, I can't believe there's a Fenian and a Muslim in the boardroom. And I immediately turned, just my humour, and I said, I can't believe that Sheriff's a Fenian, and I didn't know. But that never went down well. So I guess, it's only, the benefit of hindsight's tremendous, but it's only when you're reflecting that you realise that there is a bias that's real and it exists. And that, like at a Lumpet, you're up against it. That's just the reality. So that was my very first experience of that in Hamilton. Now, Hamilton, I guess I should have realised, maybe there's a bit of naivety in my part, but Hamilton is a football club, one of the only in the world, if not the only in the world, that's derived from a school, an academical, background. And it was non-Catholic, it was Presbyterian, at a time where Catholics were openly discriminated against in Scotland. So it makes sense, I guess, that there's some sort of lineage.
Hamilton Academical.
Yeah.
Being the name of the club.
So I take it that, I accept the fact that there will be some sort of lineage that has a bias against what I would be, represent, or stand for. And that was lost on me because of my upbringing. I wasn't brought up that way. I haven't brought my own kids up that way. So that it is what it is. Then fast forward into the SFA situation. And where this ties in, SFA, SPFL, the chap who I referenced in my article and who I've referenced in the book that I've written, he sits on both boards. And we were there to discuss legislation that was put through hurriedly about grass pitches being required to play in the Premier League. And I remember being a bit pissed off that they waited to have the vote, once they knew Livingston had been relegated, because automatically that meant that Kilmarnock would have been outvoted, whereas Livingston and Killie could have stuck together because they both have plastic pitches. Now, they may not have, I don't know, I wasn't part of the Premier League setup, but you would think if you had a plastic pitch, you would vote to protect each other. So, but ironically, or by the grace of God, or by design, whatever it was, they waited, they seemed to wait until Livingston had been relegated. And then had this vote where Kilmarnock lost, and it was a grass pitch thing that came in. Now, within the Championship, you had yourselves, Raith Rovers, Airdrie, Falkirk, Livingston, I think there's a few others who had plastic pitches, and in theory what that meant without negotiation was that you couldn't be promoted if you didn't have a grass pitch. So the clubs got together, petitioned the SPFL, went to a meeting at Hampden and so on, and I represented my club at that meeting on the basis that my vote was just as important as Celtic's. That Hamilton Academical had just as much of a right in Scottish football as Celtic. And I was left in no uncertain terms aware of where we actually stood. And what the guy had said to me is and he said it in front of several others, who don't know who they are, don't want to name them, but he said that I need to understand that Scottish football consists of three parts: Celtic, Rangers and everyone else. Now, there's a word we've got in Scotland, it's beeling. You're angry, you're frustrated. That really got to me, because not only was my club insignificant, but the rest of Scottish football was insignificant.
And this is around a vote where you all have a vote together individually, and which completely outvotes Celtic and Rangers.
Well, you think so.
Would think,
so
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, my view on it is that I don't like plastic pitches. Do you know, I'm not a huge fan of them. I think football should be on grass, so I'm not coming at it from that perspective. I think that grass looks better. I think it's safer for players. You know, it looks better if it's maintained, certainly. But I think it's better for players. It's better for football. It's better for a spectacle. But when you're in an environment like Scotland where there's not insurmountable amounts of cash kicking around, clubs rely heavily on a plastic pitch to make it commercially viable, because you get some disparate clubs like maybe Annan Athletic or Queen of the South, who, you know, they're 90, 100 miles from Glasgow. They serve their own communities. They couldn't possibly have kids playing on a grass pitch all week. It's not feasible. So, and then there's a commercial part of it where you can possibly rent the pitch out and make money from it. So, I think if the SFA and SPFL aren't putting money into clubs to that level, I don't think that they should discriminate against the clubs for not having a grass surface to. And if you win the league, you win it on merit, you'd assume. Therefore, you should be entitled to promotion. So that was my view, and that was the general consensus amongst the guys who were there. Incidentally, Falkirk went on, won the league and finished in the top six. Done a tremendous job. Jamie Swinney and John McGlynn there, the players, done a tremendous job. There was a bit of negotiation where they granted a bit of leeway, so that if you're in the league, to save you spending £1 million and getting relegated, you get 12 months or 24 months grace, whatever it was. But it was a message that was put out that really got to me. The message was that Celtic and Rangers are all that matter. The rest of the year, just the third or 3/3. And it was only towards the end of the season, for the first time in possibly my lifetime, there was a real league race that didn't involve two clubs.
Mm-hmm.
It was 3 clubs. Motherwell arguably were a fourth, up to a point. And then when you start to see some of the reportage in the papers, and I'm not online, I don't have any online like Facebook or anything like that, I don't touch that, but you see things that are shared, and you realise that what you grew up with, the discrimination, the anti-Irish racism, it's still there.
Mm-hmm. It's
just been repackaged, and that's actually where the commercial value is. So that triggered a lot of that article. And I think Martin O'Neill, who I know and who's been tremendous for me, I think Martin O'Neill's, he's been out of Scottish football for 20 years. He joined Celtic in 2001 or something like that. He became a focal point of hatred because of what he represents. As did Neil Lennon. I'm friendly with Neil. They both became focal points of.
They're Catholics from Northern Ireland.
And I think that it's okay being a Catholic for North Ireland, but it's not okay being a successful one.
Mm.
There's a difference. There's know your place. That's the kind of message that I believe is an undercurrent. I believe that legitimately, and I think there's so much evidence to support that. But the other side of that, and what I tried to articulate, was that I don't think that those responsible for the game have done enough to eradicate it, because there's a value in it. And that for me is where it goes wrong. When you look at the furore about Celtic fans invading the pitch against Hearts, they shouldn't have done it. But in that fleeting moment of time, the emotion was overwhelming. Now, I don't believe anyone was hurt or injured. What I'd also written about was when we won promotion with Hamilton in my first year as director of football, our fans were on the pitch celebrating with players and had players on their shoulders. There was no news coverage of that whatsoever. Now, I know there's only a couple of hundred people, but the significance of it is not lost in me. It can't be all right for some and not for others.
But to those couple of hundred Hamilton fans, that's just as important and just as big a day as it is for the Celtic fans winning the league with the last game of the season, isn't it? There's no difference.
Well, we get humiliated the year before because we were relegated, and we came straight back up at the first time asking. Now that was probably one of my proudest moments, because the pressure that was on us to come back up 2 years in League One would have finished us financially. Everyone was aware of that. There's a deeper story to this that I've written about in my book, but 2 years in League One would have finished us. So the pressure was on. The owner had put pressure on me to do the job I needed to do to enable the manager to get us up. And we achieved that.
You did that.
And the fans enjoyed it. I never enjoyed it. I cried when we won promotion, walking amongst people in the pitch that had berated me and humiliated me or targeted me online. They're coming up and giving you a cuddle. So I kind of cried because it was a relief. But I believed in my manager, John Rankin. I believed in Darian McKinnon, his assistant. And that was almost like there was like a valve just releasing that, wow, right, now we can start to plan ahead. Little did I know that other people had other agendas.
And but as you say, that's going to be in your book, which is coming out shortly. We put it that way. In terms of this issue, Jerry, I mean, what reaction have you had to the piece, and are people accepting that it is an issue, or are they running away from it?
No, so the commentary is quite interesting, because parts of what I've alluded to are, I tried to use South Africa as an example about apartheid, where when you try and have a positive discrimination, it has a negative effect. Now, I'm not for a minute saying that there's a positive discrimination towards Celtic, but if you look at the cycle of it, when I grew up, it was absolute Rangers dominance. Now, what we now know is that dominance was through a lack of sporting integrity, if you want to put it in a polite manner, with EBTs and so on.
Which has been proven.
Well, it's been proven, so you can talk about it. But it's still frowned upon because it's still the same club that, so on. But the thing for me was, if you look at the SFA in context at that time, it was all Rangers men who were in positions of power. And the only person who challenged that was Fergus McCann. The George Cadet registration that fell out the fax and went under a desk and fell into a chair, so he couldn't play against Rangers. And Jim Farry lost his job in the back of that because McCann went after him. He had the resources to do it, and he never came for a position of bias. He was just looking for natural justice. And he also targeted the bigotry piece by bringing out a Boys Against Bigotry charter, which didn't go down well with a lot of people, but that's what was needed to make a pointed difference to a disgusting part of society. So it took a guy from Canada to come in and make that change. And it has worked to a large degree. There's still an element that there's an undercurrent, but that undercurrent exists right across the board. So going back to that, they asked about the piece, some of the Celtic fans that I spoke to are not happy with it because they believed that the piece implied that Celtic get the benefit of the doubt. Now, I don't believe, I don't doubt for a minute that they did. Some decisions that went in Celtic's favour, but I don't believe they got those decisions because it was Martin O'Neill. And it's arguable, are they getting decisions because of maybe Celtic-minded people within the SPFL or SFA? I don't know, because the backgrounds don't concern me in the slightest. But what I do know is that when Rangers get liquidated, there was a heavy reliance on Celtic to continue to bring money into the game. And equally, I've written about this several months ago, I think Rangers have done more for Scottish football than any other club since coming back into the leagues because of the financial contribution they've made from the bottom all the way up. And I've never seen anyone praise them for that either. That money kept clubs going for years. And the reality is, when you strip it back and you look at the tribalism that exists, Celtic are nothing without Rangers, and you could argue vice versa.
And in terms of the contribution you say Rangers made, is that in terms just of bringing gates to games and bringing ticket revenue, etc., or is there more to it than that?
I think there's a bit more to it than that. There's certainly the revenue. You've got every stadium was sold out. And you could argue that the advertising money that people were willing to pay, and the corporate hospitality and so on, and TV money, was money that these clubs would never ever have gotten. Now I've seen what the SPFL pay when you're in League One, and there's waiters would earn more money. That's the reality. You could earn more money as a waiter doing a full-time job than what you get paid out for the league at the end of the season, if they pay you out. But so when you look at what Rangers are giving these clubs, a lot of them are part-time. If they've used that kind of, if they've been fiscally prudent with that money, that'll have kept him going for a few years. And I've never seen anyone praise Rangers for that. You know, it's lost. And then the European coefficient has benefited because somehow or other Rangers' performances in Europe have excelled beyond
Their league.
anyone else in Scotland.
Yeah.
You know, they've got to...
And beyond their league performances as well at times.
Absolutely, aye. I mean, they got to the UEFA Cup final against Frankfurt there. So the contribution's been huge, you know, and I think that's maybe frowned upon by some people because a lot are of the opinion that Rangers shouldn't be there because they were liquidated.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is this Old Firm tag is one that's got a commercial value to it, and it's not because of football. It's because of everything else that goes with it.
Is it in any way a two-way street, Jerry? Are there people on the Celtic side who are guilty of this as well?
Guilty of
the bigotry and the discrimination?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, aye. I mean, you hear it at games. You know that there's, you know, you hear some songs. Now, I've only been to 3 Celtic games in the last season. You know that since I got involved at Hamilton, I kind of stopped going to Celtic matches because it was frowned upon by a section of our fans. You know, how dare I go to watch a team that I supported? You know, so I stopped going because I think there's a professional responsibility, you know, that came with the job. And you hear some silly songs. Do you know that there's one of the songs that Celtic fans sing, it riles me, and it was it's to the tune of On the Windroad, and they've got Soon There'll Be No Protestants at All. And then you sing, you know, the irony is you sing a song about if you know your history a minute ago.
Yeah.
And now your ignorance is taking you into a realm that's just disgusting.
How do you end all that? Is it education? Is it upbringing, as you said, going back to your own upbringing, etc.? Is it values that need to be?
Aye, I think there's the values are massive within it. The parents have to take responsibility. So I wasn't brought up that way. But I think equally I think the league and the association could do a lot more to eradicate it, you know, by being as poignant as Fergus McCann was about boys against bigotry. It's not just words. You have to actually go and
live it.
Go and make a campaign and make it stop. And you know that the repercussions if you don't. Now, when I look at some of the sanctions we suffered at Hamilton on behalf of the SPFL, there's nothing to stop them sanctioning Celtic Rangers, you know, for behaviour of that type. It's absolutely within their power to do it.
But there has to be a willingness to do it, doesn't there?
There has to be, aye. And when Scottish football consists of 3 key components and 2 of them are them, well, why would you do it?
How will the Hearts' almost success, let's call it, this season, will it change that at all, do you think?
I don't know. That's an interesting one, Carl, because I think that I don't think you'll ever see Celtic and Rangers drop as many points again as they did last year. If you look historically at the number of points that they've accumulated, I think both would acknowledge they had bad seasons. So you can pull it any way you want and dress stats up any way you want to dress them up. You know, where Hearts are outstanding or where Celtic Rangers really bad. And somewhere in the middle there might be a bit of, you know, a bit of
the actual story.
A bit of reality.
Yeah.
I don't think, certainly from what I've seen in Celtic on TV, you know, they were really, really poor, and it took somebody like Martin to drag them out the mire twice. Rangers' comeback from where they were was just astronomical, you know, under Danny Rowe, and it was only the last 6 games that cost them. You know, I thought at one stage the league was completely in their hands, and the last 6 games, they finished them off.
Yeah, they ran out of steam, didn't they? They just literally came to a halt. Does that make Martin O'Neill's achievement this time around way more significant than anything the first time he was at Celtic? Or
God, you need to ask Martin. The next time I'll send him a text. The next time I see him, I'll ask him.
Tell him we have a question for him.
I think my opinion of it is that yes, because he's not had the chance to sign any of his own players. If you look at the players that he brought in January, they weren't Martin O'Neill type players, whereas first time around he signed Sutton, Sutton, Hartson. Who else? He brought in a few big
Neil Lennon,
Baldy and stuff.
Did he sign Neil Lennon?
He signed Lenny, he did. He signed Lenny as well. So when you look at what he's done it with other people's players, which is kind of remarkable. And twice he's been right behind the 8 ball, because to the outside of looking in, it was chaotic, and there was no harmony, and the imbalance between the fans and the board was there for all to see as well. So he had to contend with that. So I think it's been a tremendous achievement.
And it's probably partly why he's coming back, because in his own mind, I'm sure he's saying, this wasn't my team, this wasn't my stamp on it. It was in terms of winning the league and winning the cup and making the team play above itself. But now he has an opportunity for at least another 12 months to fashion it in his own mould. Were you surprised he's come back, or is that part of the reason he's back, do you think?
I was surprised he wanted to come back. I think that, particularly at the stage of his life that he is. The last time I spoke to him, I met him down at Preston with my son. We went to the Preston QPR game on Easter Monday. And I had a funny feeling he was going to take the job, because he was down there with Mark Fotheringham. I'm sitting thinking to myself, why would you travel down to Preston from Dundee, on a Sunday?
Yeah.
Unless you're going to have an interest in what's coming next. He never alluded to the fact that he would be there, but I don't know why he would want to take the job, because he is running the risk of, if the board don't back him, and if he doesn't get the players in that he wants, he's running the risk of his reputation having a kind of slight blight on it. I hope and pray to God that he's a success, because he's a remarkable man and he's got so much humility and decency about him. And I think he deserves nothing but the best. So I hope to God that they back him in the way that they should.
Were you surprised at the reaction to Robbie Keane of this parish, as we say? Were you surprised at the way you mentioned the disharmony there between the board and the fans, but that seemed to particularly articulate itself when Robbie Keane's name was mentioned as having met with Dermot Desmond, and as being ultimately, as one of the papers here suggested the other day, he knew Dermot Desmond was going to give Martin O'Neill first call on this. But were you surprised at the reaction to Robbie?
I was disappointed in it, but I understand it. I understand it through, I understand it through a human lens. It doesn't condone it. Doesn't make it right. I think that Robbie's got a right to earn a living just like everyone else does, and I don't think you can put it at his door that going to Tel Aviv or whatever it was it went to, that I don't think you can put it at his door that was then to do a bias against Palestinian people, or that he's guilty of war crimes because he chose to go to Israel and earn his wages. What he has done is he's went out with his comfort zone and worked in an environment that's quite hostile, from what I understand, and he'll have learned a lot from that to take into his career. Now, I think it's wrong telling people where they can and can't work. I think it's wrong forming that judgment in people. There's a whole different question, should Israel be part of, the FIFA conglomerate, UEFA,
which is very live and kicking in Ireland at the moment, as I'm sure you're aware, Jerry. But
yes,
in terms of Robbie, I mean, it has been suggested that he could be in contention next time around, and we know Martin is definitely only there for a year, and as you said already, that depends. As we know, in recent managerial situations at Celtic, that depends on so much. But do you think, will it have abated if this time next year they're talking about Robbie Keane as a potential Celtic manager?
No. I think understanding the fan base from the perspective of a fan, the only one that's an anomaly to the case, I think, would be Ange Postecoglou, because there was awareness amongst the fans that, number one, he wasn't the first pick, and number two, the media were circling around him like vultures, dying for him to fail, and that galvanised the fans to back him. Robbie Keane coming in, there's a section of fans who are unfortunately vocal that will use that as a rod to beat him with if he's not a success. And again, it goes back to, why would you want to work in that environment when you're doing it for your love of the game and you're doing it to better yourself? I've learned certainly that, I love the game, but what you put yourself through, when you get to the back end of it, you question your sanity. And Robbie Keane being aware of that, why would they want to? You can have a great lifestyle in London and manage a club in London, get paid a lot more money and have less pressure. So that's, you probably need to factor that in his decision making.
And again, as I say, it's a conversation that won't happen probably for at least 12 months. So we may come back to it in the future. Jerry, thank you so much for your time here on Let's Talk Football. We do look forward to speaking to you again in the future. And as I said, we will put a link into your own Substack and into that article, because it was one of the most fascinating pieces I've read in Substack since joining the community, so to speak. So congratulations on that. And we wish you well in the coming weeks.